So I'm now 11 episodes into my vlog, and I figured, yeah, to heck with it. Let's talk about my autism today. Talked about it a little bit last week's episode, and I figured, why not? I was formerly diagnosed with Asperger's, which is part of the autism spectrum disorder, when I was 15, and I was re-diagnosed at the age of 26. I want to talk about what it is, how it affects me, how it manifests in me, and specifically how it affects my streaming, and just like what it means for my life. Autism is a disorder or collection of disorders, we don't really know for sure, characterized by, among other things, difficulties in socialization and interpersonal communication, some difficulties in emotional dysregulation or alexithymia, a preference for stability and routine, and usually a tendency to hyper focus on a subset of specific interests, hobbies, or other traits. The range and severity and type of symptoms is quite broad, and just because a particular symptom is common does not necessarily mean that every person on the spectrum will necessarily have that symptom. Many people with autism, particularly in its more classical forms, will have some form of intellectual disability, whereas others, such as myself, are quite intellectually gifted and it runs the gamut. Many people with autism will struggle with day to day living, and some may never be able to live without major assistance, whereas others, such as myself, can largely function day to day, although we might have some difficulties in some situations, we may need a little bit of assistance. Some people with autism are verbal, as I am. I'm clearly speaking to you right now, but I know that others are not. In short, please don't assume that just because you have one friend with autism, one friend on the spectrum, means that you know everything about everybody with autism. As the saying goes, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. We are all unique individuals with our own set of strengths, weaknesses, gifts, limitations, and so on and so forth. The root causes of autism aren't known to science, though genetics and the uterine environment in which the baby develops are both believed to play a strong role. One factor that is known not to be the cause of autism is vaccine. The original study that claims such a link has been thoroughly debunked. The scientist, in quotation marks, who originally posited that theory, again in quotation marks, has been ridiculed and discredited. Unfortunately, nonetheless, that myth does still persist. Kind of like The Walking Dead, always waiting to be conjured up by some anti-vax dimwit. Speaking of which, if you're watching this video in 2021 and you have not gotten the COVID vaccine yet, for any reason other than that you have a legitimate medical contraindication, then why don't you get off this goddamn video, go to your pharmacy, and get the vaccine already? Anyway, returning to the topic of hand, for me, there are a few challenges when it comes to being a streamer and content creator. First and simplest, it takes me a little bit of extra time compared with neurotypical folks to process my thoughts into coherent words and sentences. For those who watch my Twitch stream, you may notice that I speak with something of an unnatural cadence, random pauses interspersed between discussions or just uh, randomly in between words. In my YouTube videos, I have to really script them out almost completely so that I know what I need to say and how I need to say them and how to best address the thoughts that I have in the most coherent manner. In fact, I'm doing a lot of stealth jump cuts, just little quarter half second cuts so that you don't notice that I'm making all of these pauses. Although for these couple of sentences here, I am going to avoid making these jump cuts just so you can get a feel for what my natural cadence sounds like with all of those more awkward pauses. Unfortunately, it does tend to come off in some respects as being a little bit of shifty, shady, like I'm taking time to conjure up a lie, like I'm trying to obscure the truth, but in reality, I just need a little bit more time to formulate my thoughts into words. They just doesn't quite come naturally to me. Secondly, and it's something that I've been working on, particularly with vlog, is that eye contact is difficult, especially when it comes to like, well, you don't want to like stare into people's souls, but you also don't want to be like, I'm talking to you, I'm talking to you over here. Yeah, I'm totally talking to you right now. You right there, I'm talking to you. I don't want to do that either. During particularly intense conversations, I tend to kinda close my eyes and look inward, and that helps me to better get a feel for what is being said and helps me to really focus my mental energy on processing those words and converting them into thoughts and ruminating on them, introspecting, and then formulating the best possible response. I can't conclusively prove or disprove this hypothesis, but I do think that I might have lost potential job opportunities because in interviews, people see that, interviewers see that, and they assume that I am disinterested, that I am looking away, that I am being untruthful. And because I'm not displaying the appropriate neurotypical nonverbal communication patterns, that I come off in a way that is completely the opposite of how I actually feel. Many people on the spectrum, including those with college and even graduate degrees such as myself, often find themselves unemployed or underemployed because the typical hiring process, which involves a lot of salesmanship, projecting confidence in a neurotypical fashion, being put through this high stakes, high pressure interview gauntlet with unknown people, generally in unfamiliar environments, a heavy emphasis on so called cultural fit and making a good first impressions. All of these things are really difficult for many of us with autism. In a recent critique of these videos, one comment that I'm trying to take to heart suggests that I need to spend a little bit more time making eye contact with the camera. It's a little bit unnatural for me to stare into a camera. I'm making an effort to do so. Hopefully, you all are noticing, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge for me. A third thing is that many people with autism have a pattern of so-called stimming behaviors, such as fidgeting, flapping your arms, some sort of tick, this sort of thing sometimes that helps us to avoid going stir crazy in situations where we do end up getting overstimulated. Most of us have at least some difficulty filtering out distractions. There is definitely a correlation between autism and ADHD like symptoms, both in terms of symptomology and in terms of comorbidity. For me, I tend to start humming music when I get really stressed out. Usually it's some video game track that I was listening to or just some earworm that managed to get stuck in my head. In fact, the people on YouTube here, when you go to my speedrun videos, they absolutely hate this stuff. I've gotten some absolutely visceral, biting YouTube comments because of the humming that do during the videos. And the thing is, half the time I don't even realize I'm doing it, at least not consciously. Another thing to note is that as a result of the social difficulties that I and others tend to face if we have autism, many, if not an outright majority of us, have at least some degree of social anxiety or social phobia. I am absolutely terrified at times when or even when I'm just talking to people. I don't wanna necessarily relive all my past traumas on the internet in front of all of y'all, but I have definitely had some negative experiences, and I have tended to be very fearful with stream chat because of the asynchronicity, and I get like, oh my gosh, chat stop. Did I say something wrong? Was that offensive? How did that get interpreted?" And sometimes when it gets really quiet in chat, I start to end up spiraling and getting into this anxiety loop, and it's can be very difficult for me, and it's a real challenge that I'm having to work to try to overcome. That's not advice for anybody who's streaming. That is not advice. That is anti-advice. Do not do that. But it's just a lesson on how my autism manifests in me specifically, and to give a specific example of how my autism impacts me when I'm streaming and recording YouTube videos. So that's what I have to say on this topic. I hope that this video was insightful, informative, maybe even a little bit entertaining. I don't know. If it was, I hope that you'll consider slamming that like button to help me out with the algorithm. And until next time, stay hydrated.